Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I hope the week's gone well. We've had a really busy one, but I'll get into some of that in a minute. If you didn't have a chance to listen to the inside story I participated in, which was Is Africa Getting into a Debt Trap with China, please have a listen. And then a couple of issues which have popped up, one about bribes paid in Uganda, which dovetail into this particular inside story and the point I was making about how a lot of this infrastructure had been inflated and priced. People had creamed off money off the top, and my point was that therefore this infrastructure was never going to make the intended return on investment in the intended time if you're paying 2 or 3x of what it should really cost. Macro thoughts after short-lived Copernic dip, Nike hits an all-time high, and took me back to Paul Kagame, who said famously, "The markets are never wrong," and Nike took a clever bet there, and they've won it actually. Dollar heads for the biggest weekly loss since February. We've had pullback, a number of issues working to achieve that. Big rate hike in Turkey, a proposed meeting at the Mnuchin level, signaling maybe a thawing in the tariff wars, all created this sort of short covering rally. And I, for one, don't think it's necessarily going to last, but trying to work out where it peters out is always quite tricky. For the foreseeable future, I do not see gold, the Chinese renminbi, or crypto replacing the dollar. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes, I said. And then I saw this from RT.com. Countries dumping the US dollar in favor of national currencies inevitable. That's Russia's VTB Bank. And Ahmadinejad has been tweeting on the same point. The Wall Street Journal has it wrong. We are under no pressure to make a deal with China. They are under pressure to make a deal with us. Our markets are surging, theirs are collapsing. We will soon be taking in billions in tariffs and making products at home. If we meet, we meet. That's Trump. Take you back to tariff wars, who blinks first? Was using that example of the James Dean Rebel Without a Cause, something called a chickie run, when two teenagers get in a car and go for the cliff edge, and the winner is whoever jumps out of the car last, as it were. Turkey's lira was on a roller coaster ride yesterday. Erdogan came out with some typically fruity and forthright comments. The lira sold off. And then the central bank stepped in with a 625 basis point hike, which then rallied the Turkish lira. So a really volatile day there. I don't know whether Erdogan was smart enough to trap the lira shorts yesterday, or whether it was by design or by accident. Home Thoughts word of the day: diaphanous, transparent, filmily clear, permitting the free passage of light. From the Greek, I can't pronounce it, transparent, meaning appearing through. Scientists say they've discovered humanity's oldest known drawing on a small fragment of rock in South Africa. The drawing is about 73,000 years old and shows cross-hatch lines sketched onto stone with red ochre pigment. The find is a prime indicator of modern cognition in our species, the report says. That took me back to Don DeLillo in Point Omega, where he says we're the last billionth of a second in the evolution of matter. That billionth is now turning out to be nearly 73,000 years old. A human made the lines with an ochre crayon 73,000 years ago. You feel a very strong connection when you work in the cave. It's a time machine. You can see something and know it was put there by a human 75,000 or 90,000 years ago, and it hasn't moved at all. And next to it is the bone they chewed and the fire they made and slept around at night. It's almost weird. You can't believe that it has survived for that long. Incredible. Zebra extraordinaire at the Mara River. This is a photograph by Brent Leo Smith, and a marvelous one, isn't it? Four zebras swimming. This is a photo of a Grevy's zebra that I took in the Meru National Park. They were imported, a few of them. This was a family of three. This is the dad. And I've gone to the Meru National Park with my daughter Layla. And I went back to, because she's been with me for a while, and I was rethinking the moments that we'd spent together, which there are many, and happy ones especially. It's very intuitive and read me like a book. It's quite disconcerting. And I remember when she was about 11, she's now 20, and I had to pick her up from the school disco. And I got there, and I picked her up, and her eyes glittered. And she could scarcely stand still, you know, that kind of movement kids have when they're so excited. And I asked, darling, how was it? And she said to me, Daddy, I danced and I danced and I didn't stop. And I picked her up actually and spun her, because as Jean Rhys wrote in her novel, Wide Sargasso Sea, only the magic and the dream are true, all the rest's a lie. And for some reason that took me back to one of my favorite poems, Hafiz, a suspended blue ocean. The sky is a suspended blue ocean. The stars are the fish that swim. The planets are the white whales I sometimes hitch a ride on. And the sun and all light have forever fused themselves into my heart and upon my skin. There is only one rule on this wild playground. For every sign Hafiz has ever seen reads the same. They all say, have fun, my dear, have fun in the beloved's divine game. Oh, in the beloved's wonderful game. He's a great poet. The TV testimony of Petrov and Boshirov, who the British accuse of the Salisbury nerve agent attack against the Skripals, is funnier than any Morecambe and Wise skit, says Andrew Neil. And yes, I watched it. It is bizarre, surreal, and it's taking the proverbial, is the way I describe it. And it took me back to Vladislav Surkov, who was this advisor of Putin's, who operates on the fringes of NGOs, civil society, modern art, perception. And he described what he was doing as a ceaseless shape-shifting that is unstoppable because it is indefinable, which is how I would define the response of these two fellows. This is modern art, Vladislav Surkov style. A.S. Loon almost seems like Moscow just wants to taunt London and brag a bit, and exactly right. How could the Boshirov-Petrov interview be so bad it made the Litvinenko denials look practically airtight? Almost seems like Moscow just wants to taunt London and brag a bit. I said exactly. Vladislav Surkov refers in his idea of non-linear warfare. US Secretary of State Michael Pompeo blasted Iran's leader for his silence on China's reported detention of Muslims. Xinjiang is the issue, and that we've discussed several times. And I thought this was a rather subtle plot twist from the man with the swagger, Mr. Pompeo. International markets, as I said, the dollar was broadly lower on the back of soft US CPI. Both headline and core missed expectations month on month in August, with readings of 0.2 and 0.1 respectively. We had a bit of a short covering rally, and then that got encouraged by this low inflation print. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro dollar has just once more crossed 117 at 117.05. Dollar index 94.51, slipping back towards that key level I've been talking about. Japanese yen, let's have a look at that, 111.94. So it's a good example of risk being put back on. So you see the yen sell off. The pound, 131.13, that's been strong. And that's, I think, really on the sense that Barnier is going to accommodate Theresa May in order to triangulate Boris Johnson. The Australian dollar, let's have a look at what that is, 0.7208. That's up as well. The India rupee has strengthened to 71.785. South Korean won 11.1770. The rial, not following in the improvement across EM, is at 4.2069. The Egyptian pound 17.9075, and the South African rand, well, that's had a stonking run and is now at 14.775. Dollar index, this is a 3-month chart. I'll stick with my 94 stop. I don't fancy it coming any lower. Euro rises as ECB's Draghi is trying to talk up the economy, play down the reduction in growth forecasts for this year and next, and we're currently at 117.04. I look to fade this rally right now. ECB cut their growth forecast slightly. Risks outlook unchanged, broadly balanced despite EM woes and protectionism. Sterling blew through 131 and was sitting above it. This is from Forex Flow Live from yesterday, and it looks perky. And Forex Flow Live is talking about it running up to 132. Commodity markets, let's take a look at that. Gold is still in this range-bound area. We're at 1206. We've moved above 1200 again. We'd spent a long time below it. Crude oil, $68.57. This is key resistance. That putting up a 1-year chart, you can see we came up here. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time we're back up here. If we push through, we're going to push 10% more. If we don't, I think we're going to correct about 5 or 6% to the downside. Copper trend change, says Sun Charters. Take a look at their chart. The MSCI EM currency index had its biggest one-day rally since January yesterday. Ahead of a critical interest rate decision by Turkey's central bank, Erdogan called interest rates a tool of exploitation. But interestingly, the central bank asserted itself over Erdogan's often hocus-pocus monetary policy and jacked up interest rates 625 basis points to 24%, more than expected. Shorts got burned on the lira, and we got a big jump, as you can see from this chart from Holger. The one currency not participating in the rebound was the real, which was last at 420.69. That chart's from Sun Charters as well. The Indian rupee also joined in the rebound, notwithstanding that markets are on edge over potential measures to intervene in the rupee's weakness. But inflation printed around 4%. Currencies has been setting one record low after another, but jumped 0.5%, 71.82, after jumping 0.7% the previous day. Bond yields also dropped 3 basis points to 8.11%. Sub-Saharan Africa, Africa Confidential is leading with an article, Wave of Protests Rattle Kaguta Museveni. The Bobi Wine protests are growing into demonstrations against autocracy and impunity as the veteran president's grip falters. Ever since President Museveni's personal guards beat up and almost killed the popular musician turned politician Bobi Wine on 14th August, the normally effective mixture of security force brutality and mass detentions has failed to quell growing protest. Bobi Wine's diffuse people power movement might have eventually faded away had it not been for Museveni's personal order, so Kampala sources report, to have him disciplined after he went to the northwestern border town of Arua to hold an election meeting on the 13th of August. Listen to this. A source in the Domestic Intelligence Service, the internal security organization, told Africa Confidential that at least 6 people died as soldiers were spurred on by an angry Museveni who was following the unfolding events on the SFC's tactical communications network. A friend of mine says that he doubts that there's such a thing. But it's interesting that he was overseeing it. Museveni compounded his inept handling of the unrest in a rambling 3.5-hour speech. On the evening of 10th September, he repeated his familiar tune that the young should be grateful for the economic gains of the NRM after over 3 decades in power. He angered many listeners by saying his own children were busy with their wealth and not looking for jobs because as a parent he had provided for them. The reactions on social media were universally hostile. Then talking about the killings that we've seen, the widespread belief that the killings are carried out by rogue elements in the security services loyal to former police chief General Kale Kaihura. The general was Uganda's longest-serving police chief and Museveni's chief enforcer during 12 years of repression, which critics say included murder and extortion. He is said to be close to President Kagame. In a meeting with NRM MPs after the Bobi Wine controversy started, after which Speaker of the House Rebecca Kadaga wrote to him asking him to explain the torture allegations, he reportedly said, this is Museveni, he could even abolish Parliament if he wanted to. Some of his close advisers say that the violence by the security forces is the only option the president feels he has left to bring dissatisfied and unemployed youth angry at 32 years of his rule and rooting corruption back under control. And here, I quoted Harold Macmillan's famous speech in Cape Town, "The wind of change is blowing through this continent whether we like it or not. This growth of national consciousness is a political fact." And I concluded by saying, I refer you to Uganda. Bobby and Barbie Wine are now in the US, but what caught my attention was this video of revelers and a regime apologist, Bebe Cool UG, being, kicked off the stage, and events with Bobby Wine. And I said, inflection points are difficult to discern, but this is one right here, in my view, in Uganda. Now, another interesting report came out. Ugandan president found that the Chinese company CHEC paid a $200 million bribe to get the $2 billion standard gauge railway deal, and he's been demanding to have the price reduced. A whopping $200 million bribe in order to secure a contract to construct the standard gauge railway, President Museveni has been told, according to insiders. China Harbour Engineering Company has made these revelations to President Museveni and even provided a list of officials to whom the payments were made. Well-placed sources have told The Independent. The Chinese were later informed that President Museveni was considering cancelling the contract if they did not reduce the price. That is when, in the final 2 definitive meetings, the Chinese officials told Museveni that part of the reason they could not reduce the contract price was because they'd already paid hefty commissions to the tune of $200 million. The president immediately demanded to know whom this money had been paid to. With stakes so high, insiders say the Chinese offered to reduce by $120 million and provided a list of names they had paid the $200 million to. Interesting development, but this is symptomatic, as I said, of the problem on Chinese infrastructure spending. $200 million is small. Ethiopia's new leader is whittling away the old guard's power. David Pilling in the Financial Times. These days it feels like New Year in Ethiopia every day. Mr. Abiy has been Prime Minister for less than 6 months after the abrupt departure of his predecessor. Such has been the thirst for political change that his ascendance and the startling use he has made of his newfound authority have been greeted with near euphoria. Polls suggest he has a 90% support rate. People in a country with a median age of 19 snap up books about their new hero. The new Prime Minister has become a sort of cross between Che Guevara and Emmanuel Macron. Almost inevitably, his rise has spawned the term Abiy Mania. So far, despite an assassination attempt, Abiy Mania has not bitten the dust. Political foundations on which Ethiopia's experiment were built were crumbling. EPRDF maintained power as much through repression as through social progress, facilitated land grabs, tortured people, and Abiy has pretty much conceded all this. The era of Tigrayan domination is over. Ethiopia's new leader has removed prominent Tigrayan figures. He's moved at tremendous speed. And as I said, after about 90 or 95 days, I wrote a piece saying these 90 or so days represent the most consequential arrival of an African politician on the African stage since Mandela walked out of prison, blinking in the sunlight. I was talking about him crisscrossing the country, ending a state of emergency, releasing thousands of political prisoners, thawing relations with Eritrea, bagging $1 billion from the UAE, announcing a dramatic economic U-turn. In matters in language and linguistics, he's tapped into a Nelson Mandela 1994 mood, and that's why I concluded by saying these 90 or so days, which are more than that now, represent the most consequential arrival of an African politician on the African stage since Mandela walked out of prison, blinking in the sunlight and constructed the Rainbow Nation. And I also said a few weeks ago, to disrupt, you have to move at lightning speed, and that's what he's doing. South Sudan warring leaders sign a new peace deal, Groundhog Day, no doubt. Old Mutual's Harare shares trading at 3 times London price. Zimbabweans pile into stock market as hedge against inflation. Zimbabwe's fear gap is back as a dollar pinch worsens 6 weeks on from disputed elections. This is from Paul Wallace. South African all shares down 5.61% year to date. Dollar versus Rand. The Rand had a big rebound, caught me off guard. We're now at 14.7723. Think of those one-touch options again if we rally a little bit more. Egyptian pound is at 17.9105. Nigeria's stock market fell further yesterday. It's down 28% since the end of January, which is the worst performance globally, according to Bloomberg. Nigerian all shares minus 16.27% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is plus 6.56% year to date. Interesting essay about the politicization and resistance in the Zimbabwean National Army that I came across. That link is on Rich Roundups. When President Kenyatta asked for advice about how to handle President Trump during his state visit to Washington, a lobbyist told him talk business and security. It turned out to be a good steer, with Kenyatta emerging as Trump's man in Africa, which is something I actually predicted. The two hit it off at a press conference after the meeting, a far warmer show than Trump's painful meeting with Nigeria's President Buhari. However, Trump has shown next to no interest otherwise in Africa. His wife Melania has announced she will be making her first visit ever in October, a month before the ruling Republicans face midterm elections. Redcap tweeted, "Help explains why President Kenyatta is rejecting the finance bill because it does not impose 16% VAT on fuel. Sovereign downgrades are not what Kenya needs when it no longer has IMF support." You can say that again. So Kenya announced that its standby deal with the IMF is over, but they will continue engaging with the fund. Yes, the program has ended, Henry Redtich told reporters when asked about the IMF standby arrangement. I wrote yesterday that the IMF standby facility was never drawn down and was always about signaling. We have dived into the Eurobond markets, and the facility was a signal to that market and others that we were deserving of a policy-making premium. And frankly, the IMF facility was cheap at the price because it had a beneficial effect on our borrowing spread. I also appreciate that we're sitting at a record high in regard to FX reserves. However, if you look around the world today, what was once a benign environment for EM in the frontier, which was surfing a golden wave of practically free dollar liquidity, has become dark, turbulent, and violent. Look at Turkey, where Erdogan's Turkish lira has been in free fall. India, where the rupee is trading new all-time lows every day. The Fed's balance sheet reducing and choking off the supply of cheap dollars. And here in Africa, look at Zambia, where the bond prices are pricing in a default. And therefore, to forego the facility now would seem perverse. You are throwing over an insurance policy just when you need it the most. So I, for one, think the macho talk is poorly advised. Therefore, we should be prudent and not cavalier at this juncture. Kenya let 1.5 billion IMF standby loan expire. That's from Bloomberg. There's nothing unique about a program ending, Henry said. We've had a successful 2-year program which is now coming to an end, and we will come to engage with the fund with a view to enter into a new arrangement or relationship. We can still engage and get back into it if we think it is necessary, he said. Shilling dropped 0.3%. Yields on the country's 10-year Eurobonds gained a basis point. Kenya isn't facing a balance of payments crisis. The credibility that is attached to an IMF approval or acknowledgement should not be discounted, Gibran Qureshi. This is what Henry said. We should be relying less and less on IMF facilities, especially because we have come of age in macroeconomic management and we're able to go to the international capital markets with or without the fund. You should be disavowed of that notion, and that's why I'm worried, actually, that he should be thinking that way. Principal Treasury Kamal Thuge said early on Thursday the IMF recommended the government not exceed a threshold of 74% of net present value. I've never heard him say such a thing. So as I said, you're throwing over an insurance policy just when you need it most. It was to protect you against exogenous shocks, and the world suddenly you're seeing a lot of shocks coming from an exogenous direction. Regarding the fines that were levied on the banks, I said the central bank is bearing its fangs, trying to bring under control what have been Wild West operations. Chief executives and employees of banks who helped ship out billions of shillings from the NYS will be arrested and prosecuted, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nurdin Haji, has said. I've met with the Governor of the Central Bank and with the head of the Financial Reporting Centre to discuss and agree with them how we can ensure the banking system is not used to launder the proceeds of theft and fraud. From today, those banks that break our anti-money laundering laws and regulations will at a minimum lose their banking licenses. And really, it's a very sensitive issue, and if the banks don't get ahead of the curve, these banks in particular, proof of the pudding will be in the eating. They're going to be in deep trouble. In a bear market, you're going to see their share prices affected. Nigeria's woes sees MTN's market value sink below Safaricom's. Quite incredible. And what I thought was maybe this is the time for Safaricom and Bob Collymore to consider a takeover, even a hostile one, of MTN. The Nairobi Stock Exchange has been hit plumbing new lows. The NSE 20 has been in a bear market for a while. The all share goes in a bear market today. Shares that have touched their lowest levels since listing: Kenya Power, Mumias, Nation Media, Deacons. Kenya shilling 101.19. Let's see what happens today. Nairobi all shares down 8.04% year to date. NSE 20 down 19.45% year to date. Ramanyang tweeted Kenya's main index closes nearly 1% lower at well under 3,000 points. Year to date losses 19.45%. And that took me back to Mirrors on the Ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. And she said, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man. We are programmed to receive. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. This is a photograph of an accident involving 6 vehicles on Kenyatta Avenue. And some bright spot tweeted, having looked at that photograph, everybody's phone has been nicked, no doubt. US presents Kenya with the official letter authorizing direct flights, KAA, to receive 150 million shillings for additional security equipment and training. A flight direct to New York, something that sounds quite tempting.